Yeah, you know who it is. For those of you that don't, I am Cytonius, the opposite of the phoniest. And with me today, I have a really good friend, a legendary creator. Just I could go down a list of things that you do, but I'm actually gonna let you introduce yourself. So today I have with me Troy Jeffrey Allen, and I'm gonna let you go down your credentials.
Troy Jeffrey Allen. All right, yeah, where do I start? Work for Diamond Comic Distributors, which doesn't mean a lot to people, but people do recognize their brands, which is Previews World and Free Comic Book Day. I'm the consumer marketing manager there. I've also been writing comic books since 2008. I had a comic called Bam on Webtoons. It was a digital comic, and like we transitioned into Webtoons around like 2013, I want to say. I did a book called Fight of the Century. I also did The Unconventional History of Washington, D.C., where I did a short story about the guy who designed the inauguration badges for President Obama. I've worked with various other places, but primarily most people know me as that previews guy, right? I've been fortunate enough to sit across from people like Frank Miller and Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and like have actually pretty great conversations with them about comic books and their careers. And I feel like I've been very fortunate to do that. So, short version.
Yeah, and I watched several of those. I read Fight of the Century.
Hmm.
I watched your interview with Todd McFarlane. We did a panel together, actually. It was me,
Yeah.
you, Joseph Eilich,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
yeah. So and that was actually one of the coolest experiences of my life because
Hmm.
he broke down how he was like the first black editor
Yeah.
of the Batman comic. So I'm just like, yeah, you're a legend. And the funny thing is, we've known each other for years. Like, yeah,
Yes.
I used to come to the comic book shop. Well,
Yeah.
it was Jeppy's at one point, Steve
Yeah.
Jeppy's, and then it
Hmm.
transitioned into Alliance Comics.
Yep.
And yeah, you were like one of the coolest dudes there. You just knew so much stuff about comics. And when I saw you like working with Previews magazine, which I used to buy Previews,
Oh yeah.
actually, yeah, and I'm like, dude, like I know him, like he's leveling up, man. He's doing all of these
Right,
amazing
right,
things, man. So it's an honor to have you here today, and we're just gonna have like a real, just shoot the shit, talk about comics and content creation. So I
right.
know
Yeah.
you
Oh,
have several
such a dirty
projects.
word.
You said what?
Such a dirty word.
What content?
Yeah, I mean, like I get it. Like it's I am not a fan of treating these things like content, but that's a whole nother conversation we could probably get into actually on this in here. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you are currently in the process of starting and I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly,
mhm.
a self-published magazine, or is it through a distributor? Or is
um,
self-published?
it is self-published. I mean, the plan is to transition it into getting it to, truthfully, to get into head shops, to comic book stores, to smaller stores like Sankofa and Caribou. Well, actually, I don't know if Caribou exists anymore. Now that I think about it, I just thought
Up
about
on,
that.
up on U Street, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if it still does. But like, yeah, I'm really trying to create this like this. I'm a big fan of the of a lot of the counterculture stuff. I read constantly about just psychedelia, you know, in the 60s and the 70s and different movements and also going into the 80s, but also just even beyond that, just like some of the 70s filmmakers who pioneered what we know as Hollywood now. And so I've always been a big fan of the independent spirit, right? Like the indie guys who come in and just kind of kick over everything, but also change the game. So I'm really hoping that we can get into those spaces more with this magazine.
So how much are we able to discuss? Because I've
Hmm.
like you sent me some stuff and I read through it and I kind of, got a feel for what you were trying to do. And
Hmm.
the one thing I want to talk about, I guess, is the idea of intersectionality with Black media, because I feel
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
is that's like an underappreciated thing within like Black media because so much of Black media gets isolated into like the hood, either the hood or
Yeah.
something very like lesson driven. Like it has to be a story about overcoming obstacles or
Right. Yeah.
overcoming the hood.
Yeah.
But with Afro Futures, which is your project, I realized that one of the things that I read when I was reading like the press kit that you gave me is just keeping it like fun, not putting all of this
Yeah.
weight
Yeah.
on on creators, on black creators, to be like the end all be all. You know what I mean? Because when that happens, it kind of makes people disconnect
Yeah.
from a lot of black media, I think personally,
Hmm.
because then it becomes something that's like trying to beat you over the head with like, yo, we're
Right.
black and we got to teach you a lesson about history and slavery. And it's like, we're multifaceted.
Right.
Black intersectionality exists because blackness is multiculturalism, because
Yes. Hmm.
within what you're doing, I'm seeing aspects of like funk, hip
Right.
hop, comics, sci-fi, and that's an intersectionality that honestly you don't really see promoted a lot. So
No.
I guess I kind of want to get your insight. Well, I guess I want to get your perspective on what motivated you to kind of go in that direction with it.
You always have to be careful with, how you approach this sort of thing, right? Because, on one side you've got and this is actually to answer your question, especially in comics. On one side, you have the extreme. And I'm going to use the terminology that these groups use for each other. I also want to point that out because I'll be real with you. A lot of this shit is corny to me, and I don't really get it.
Yeah.
Right? But on one side, you've got the SJWs, right, who go a little too hard in the paint. Usually are are usually doing what I consider altruistic racism in a lot of ways,
Mm.
which is this notion of we're protecting you from yourself, you know, and when things get, I'll use blackness as an example, but you can apply it to other things as well. When things get too black, right, then they get uncomfortable, right, because it got real and they weren't prepared for that, and they're really used to this codified Twitter version of what being an ally is, right? On the other side, you have, again, just using the terms that they use because I just think it's simpler. The comics gate, right? There's usually always some sort of gate at the end of whatever the opposition is, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right. And on that side, you get those who are just culturally ignorant, right? And are, you know, but also hyper reactive, overreactive in the same way that SJWs are, quote unquote SJWs, right? Um, the way they are, but like in the opposite direction, which is like, oh, you put a black person in it, now it's woke, right? Um, and I just, all that stuff is stupid to me. Like it's so dumb. And it's one of those things where I have to I look at a lot of this stuff at this point. I'm like, can I just live? Like, like can I be a creative person? Am I allowed to be a creative person in a creative space the way that white creators are allowed to be a creative person in a creative space, right? Um, do I have to hang my hat on a message or a meaning or deeper or trying to relate it to people in a way that's always attached to trauma porn, right? And don't get me wrong, there are things out there that exist currently, that are well done, amazing pieces of work by black filmmakers, black comic creators, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also this immediate reaction from the media to uh, graft onto that stuff, right? And do more of it, right? And so I'll give you the perfect example, Get Out, right? Get Out, I think, is a great movie. It's an excellent film, right? But now we're in this sea of horror, black horror films that all have to relate to real life trauma in some sort of way, right? And I come from the mentality that entertainment should entertain.
Mhm.
And that's not to mean, and like, that's not to go in the opposite direction. I'm not trying to be in the camp of guys like Eric July or whatever, right? Where like, where I'm just like, oh, it's woke and I don't want to be a part of this and blah blah blah. I'm not doing that either because I think the best entertainment also is trying to get some idea across. It doesn't necessarily have to be a message. It doesn't necessarily have to be about race or sex or gender or but it's getting some idea across. It has to. I think that's what art is. Um, so, what I try to do with Afro Futures is really trying to create something that allows Black creators to express themselves openly, like, without the prying eyes of white editorial, without the heavy-handedness of the internet. Of course, the internet will do whatever it wants with this once it's out, right?
Yeah.
But I really just wanted to create a space for Black creative expression, and push all that other stuff aside. Like, and one of the things I've told quite a few of the creators on this, not that they need to know this, but I just had to say it out loud, is like, please, whatever you do with these stories that we do in this magazine, do not make this about our relationship with white people. Like, do not do that. Like, the minute we do that, we're going to become like everything else. And already the way that people want to market this thing is going to immediately get put into a class of, oh, it's a Black thing, and then it's woke, good or bad, whichever way you come from that, right? Um, so we don't have to lean into that because they're already going to do that anyway.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and I buried the lead a little bit, but Afro Futures is a comics magazine, and much in the way that 2000 AD Heavy Metal was.
Yeah.
It's something that I've long thought about how you can give people some serious entertainment value for a reasonable price, right? And I kind of feel that a lot of what I'm seeing in the landscape right now is uh, really short comics. Comics are too short to read, right? And enjoy, and you kind of forget about them in a month, right? And so I wanted to give people something that like really feels like an experience when they get into it, right? Like when they pick it up and it shows up at your doorstep. It's on Kickstarter now, of course, and it shows up at your doorstep or whatever. Uh, you really do get, by the end of the last page, you really do think that you went on a ride, and this, hopefully it'll be something that you remember for a long time. So that's a long way of saying that uh, this book is a reaction to the reaction in a lot of ways. And we're trying to really just kind of step around this conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, because at this point, I feel like it in itself is a limitation.
Yeah.
And it feels like a form of ghettoization in a lot of ways. And I want to think more about what a Black future, what is the next step, what is the step after that, right? Like if we get all these things that we want, right, in a perfect world, what is what is the future of Black entertainment supposed to look like? And that's what we're doing here.
That is that's incredibly potent. That's incredibly potent, man. Like
Right.
wow. Wow. I was sitting there like, yes, this is the future.
This is the future. I mean, like it has to be, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
if we're going to invoke the concept of Afrofuturism, then it has to be one of those things where, Afrofuturism at its base, and once I really understood this, it really was kind of like a creative license in itself. Afrofuturism in this base is about imagining our future selves, right? And also our furthest selves. And so my whole attitude is, okay, if we're going to do that, let's do it for real. Like, let's disassociate from whiteness, right? Like, let's disassociate from that stuff and think about us and where we want to be and what Black myths we can prop up along the way, because I also think that's important.
It's very important. And one thing I kind of want to go back to, and it's not even the thing we discussed here. It's a conversation that me and you had a couple of years ago on Facebook, and it was
Mhm.
about white male power fantasy. And
Mhm.
I think you were disagreeing with my perspective on the concept of a white male power fantasy, or I might not have explained it
Mhm.
correctly because I was saying that superheroes are essentially a white male power fantasy. And I
Mhm.
recall you saying that that's a very simplistic perspective of it. And
Mhm.
I know why you said that, and I respect why you said that, and
Mhm.
I don't disagree with that. But that's why it's problematic because it is simplistic. And the way that you describe Afro Futures, it's a way to fight against that white male
Yeah.
power fantasy.
Oh yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
when you think about mythology, or rather, when you think about heroism, right?
Mhm.
You have to think about the spaces that heroism exists in.
Mhm.
Heroism exists on a mythic scale. It
Yeah.
also exists on a militarized scale. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
when you think about superheroes, those are really the two baselines for superheroes. They're either soldiers or they're gods, especially
Mhm.
in today's age. And with
Mhm.
whiteness being like the foundational framework of what heroism or superheroes represent,
Mhm.
um, I think that's one of the reasons why so many and I'm not trying to, I'm just gonna be blunt and say that's why so many white people and black people who are white adjacent reject the idea of black people existing in spaces like science fiction and anything that
Mm,
exists outside of, like, once again, that hood barrier.
mm,
But what I find interesting about subgenres like the hood films or black
mm.
exploitation is that those films, especially black exploitation, is very multicultural and very
Oh yeah,
multi-genre because you had
absolutely.
horror, you had
Hmm.
superhero, like what's the joint? A bar, the Black
The Black
Superman.
Superhero Band. Yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you had joints like that. You had like Blackula. You had John Shaft. You had martial
Yeah.
arts with Jim Kelly and stuff.
Hmm.
So once again, what you're doing, I feel like you're taking it back to the foundation that many people kind of forgot existed. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Because a lot of people don't know the history, or they don't dig into the history of black media. And for
No,
me
right.
personally, that's what I try to do
Mhm.
with OmniFrame. Like
Right.
I
Yeah.
try
Of
to dig
course.
into
Right.
like intersectionality and black media with a lot of the things. That's why I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm sorry if I'm rambling on, but
No. 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 This is it.
um, one thing I want to kind of talk to you about, and it veers away from the topic of Afro futures, but it stays in that realm.
Hmm.
Um, okay, let me choose my words correctly. So,
Hmm.
film analysis or pop culture analysis
Hmm.
being a thing that's dominated by whiteness.
Hmm.
How do you feel that black creators like yourself can kind of create content that allows for like in-depth analysis so we can get a better understanding of what black media means, not just to black people but also
Hmm.
to non-black people, because I think that's where the disconnect happens. There are tons of film like courses in colleges, right, that study shit like Casablanca,
Yeah.
Gone with the Wind, but you
Right.
don't see film analysis digging into like the symbolism of like Minister Society or
Mm.
Juice. Or I recently did a video on Straight Outta Compton, and I did that video for that
That
reason
was a
to
really
kind
good
of
video.
thank you. Like I did
Hmm.
that video because I wanted to humanize what people call gangster rap, but really humanize black, black youth, because that's what
Yeah.
hip
Yeah.
hop is.
That's where
And
it is. Right. Yeah.
but I'm sorry, like go, like what's your thoughts on like what I'm
I,
asking?
you know, I have conflicting. Instead of coming down with an answer, right? I have some conflicting views on this, right?
Yeah,
Within myself, right?
yeah,
I went to school for film, right? I did film theory classes. Like, I graduated with a degree in broadcast technology. Um, and so
right,
I sat in those classes, and of course they would bring up "Do the Right Thing" and stuff like that. Of course, like those would come into the conversation, right? Um, but at the same time, I think that nothing is more valuable of an education than listening to what the creators are actually saying. And that could be everything from taking oh god, why am I forgetting his name right now? But taking the director of Birth of a Nation's words about race at face value and understanding that that is a racist movie and it is
very
a
much,
piece of propaganda, right?
very much.
Um, versus Oscar Micheaux, you
Yeah,
know, and understanding why he made the type of films he made. You know, I think that stuff. I think that's really where the education comes from. And I'm kind of in this. One of the reasons I had a weekly show on previews, and we did it for like about 4 years. We did it through the pandemic even. And I really started to feel like it was becoming too much of a response to the opinions of people online, you know? And I realized that I didn't want to be part of that conversation anymore. Because at the end of the day, what the creator says is good enough for me. I don't need to I don't need to editorialize. I want the education of that person's perspective, right?
yeah,
And so I think that somewhere in there is the answer, right? It's I think that your type of criticism, like the type of stuff you provide, whether I agree with you or not, right? Like we were just talking about
yeah,
the white male power fantasy thing. Whether I agree with you or not, it's thought provoking, right? And
yeah,
it forces you to ask questions, right?
yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and I think that stuff is great. But of course, on the flip side of it, you have everybody talking about, oh, they're review bombing this movie on Rotten Tomatoes, and and then you got a million YouTube channels that talk about how much they hate Star Wars, but they always talk about it every single week,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
you know, and uh, that stuff to me is like what's the term? Is like the mind killer. It's also the art killer. I think in a lot of ways, and
Mm.
man, there's a few angles we could go with this, man. Because like we really should talk more often on these things.
Yeah, we should. I'm surprised you don't. I'm like, yeah, like we the same. We have the same name. Like both of us are.
Right, yeah, right. Troy, there you go. No, okay. Yeah, this is going to go in a weird direction, but just kind of follow me. This is kind of also answering your question, but this is also my personal, I guess, fan theory about what happened. Right when I came to college, I was the type of kid who read Leonard Maltin, read Pauline Kael, read Roger Ebert's books. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I joked with somebody earlier on a stream, I think it was, that I was the type of kid that read the newspaper. I would just read the style section of the newspaper, right? Not just for the cartoons. I just was wanted to read about the entertainment stuff,
Mm.
um, and so my standard for entertainment journalism, for film criticism, comes from a very different era at this point. I feel like a wildly different era from at this point. And so when I walked into college, I had that mentality, and that's kind of how we were educated about film, to be honest, in that way. Um, and when I came out of college, I think something really interesting happened because this is like about early 2000s. The geek chic, I guess, for lack of a better term, era kind of kicked into high gear, right? And it's coinciding, of course, with like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies, and I think Big Bang Theory had just started to be on television, and all these things were kind of happening at the same time. Um, and like clockwork, corporations kind of caught on, right? Larger corporations caught on, right? And started to try to find ways to further monetize this thing so that it doesn't phase out, right? And I think that what happened is they decided at some point, because it coincided with the internet as well, and they figured out, oh, we can sell nerddom as this this identity, like but a very but your particular brand, the thing that you love, is your identity now, right? And
Mm.
I think we got a whole generation of young adults who fell for that, right? And I won't even sit here and say that I didn't fall for it in some way, shape, or form, right?
We
But
all
I
did.
also, we all did, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also kind of had this. I was also the kid who read, the style section in the
Yeah.
newspaper, right? So I always kind of had this uneasy distance that I kind of would create for myself from that stuff. But it definitely took hold of an entire generation, and I don't know what you would call that generation exactly, right? I think it was kind of an intersection of a few things, but you can also kind of see that shift. You can really mark that shift as when Comic Con became less about comics, right?
Yes.
Like
Ooh.
that's really the demarcation line,
Yeah,
right?
and that was in the like the mid like early 2000s because I remember I grew up in like Southeast DC. Like I don't like we have the same name, but our backgrounds might be different because I grew up in the hood. I grew up in the trenches. So and I didn't go to like college. I worked at a college, and that's actually how I fell in love with media analysis. I worked at GW in
Mhm.
my early 20s, and I would just go. I remember working at GW, and one of the course books was Watchmen. I remember I stole it. And I read it and I was like, what the fuck is that? And what I'm saying, and I much like you as a kid, I used to watch like Leonard Maltin and Gene Shalit and
Right.
Siskel and Ebert and all of that. And I've always been like a pop culture nerd. I mean, clearly, given that we're on the same frequency with a lot of how we think about media, it's
Mhm.
obvious.
Right.
But what I'm going to say to add on to what you're saying is what I think happened with nerd culture. It happened in two phases. You had the X-Men Raimi era of like comic book movies
Right.
and making those characters pop culture, right? Like pop culture dominant forces.
Hmm.
And what that spoke to, especially Spider-Man, it spoke to a very, and I'm using buzzwords, but I'm not like a whatever. It used very liberal sensibilities.
Oh yeah.
Spider-Man, Raimi's Spider-Man, that era is very different than the Avengers MCU era. And I'm gonna talk
Yes.
about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Absolutely. Right.
Spider-Man, Daredevil, all of those movies, even to lesser like Punisher and all, they came out at a point in time where America had like a very conservative president, but America
Hmm.
still had more liberal sensibilities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Hmm.
the superheroes, they weren't soldiers. None of them
Right.
were soldiers.
Right. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
X-Men were the closest thing. They were paramilitary. Blade is scratching the surface. Blade was more of a mercenary. If you think
Right.
he's like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
mercenary mixed with a samurai.
Hmm.
So that era, and also the fact that social media didn't exist. So
Not in the way that we know
radical,
it now. Right. Yeah.
yeah, radical opinionated extremism
Yeah.
wasn't in the public consciousness.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you get to 2012 and you get the Avengers, and the
Hmm.
Avengers are very paramilitary, and every single Marvel movie is paramilitary. It's not even
Hmm.
they are the military. Iron Man,
Hmm.
Captain America,
Hmm.
even Thor. Thor is technically a soldier. He's a
Hmm.
warrior king. They're all
Hmm.
soldiers. Even
Hmm.
T'Challa, they're all soldiers. They all represent right wing soldier jingoistic American sensibilities, and that
Hmm.
coincides with the radical extremists, like youth culture that started to emerge during like the latter years of the Obama administration and the Trump era. So
Interesting. Yeah.
what's happening with comic book fans now is they're becoming Bill O'Reilly. They're becoming the comic book nerd version of Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and all of those guys like that because being loud and obnoxious is kind of a trait of nerd culture because nerd culture is deeply tied to like obsessive, emotional enjoyment of a thing,
Hmm.
fanaticism.
Yeah. That's
And
what I call fans. Right.
exactly.
Hmm.
And when you think of political, like, individuals like the individuals that I named, politics are very fanatical. You know what
Oh
I
yeah.
mean? And
Right.
it's
Right. Right.
that intersection, that's the new intersection. The intersection ain't what I was saying about Blade and Kung Fu and eating, electronic dance music and shit.
Yeah. Right.
The
Yeah.
the new intersection is radical right-wing extremism mixed with superheroes because superheroes represent the establishment now. So these
Mm-hmm.
all of these guys talking about comics gate this and gamer gate that,
Mm-hmm.
their mind state is the same mind state of right-wing pundits. Their Ann Coulter, their what's the girl that looked like an ugly version of Gabrielle? What the fuck is her name? Candace Owens, that one.
Okay. And so
That
the
joint.
ugly version of
Yeah.
Gabrielle Union, is that what you're about to say?
No, Gabrielle Union not ugly. I'm saying like her
Oh,
evil
okay.
doppelganger. Like I call Candace Owens evil Laura Hill. But yeah,
Okay. I can see
but you see what I'm
that.
saying? Like that the new intersection is like political extremism, or rather pseudo intellectual political extremism
Mhm.
with superheroes. And I actually think,
Pseudo. Yeah, pseudo is key. Yeah.
yeah, because they're not intellectuals. Because, like you mentioned, you were reading the style section, you were reading film analysis books. When
Hmm.
I like the past 20 years, I've been in that. I used to hang out at bookstores every Friday, man. Like
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I would be reading, I'd be in Barnes and Noble reading comics and books on physics and philosophy in Cornell West.
Mhm.
That's what Cytonius is. Cytonius is if you took Stanley and mixed them with Cornell West. And I don't know if people really get that about me,
Get
but
that? Yeah.
that's really what that is. I took
Uh,
Mamiya, Abu Jamal, and I mixed them with like not Jeremy Johns, but like Bob Chipman or Movie Bob or one of those guys. And I took
uh,
those two things and I mixed them together. And
yeah.
that's why like guys like me and you don't deal with trolls the way that I deal with a lot of trolls because I just
Yeah.
be out there typing and shit and making shit, but like videos and shit like that. But we exist in the same space
Oh
mentally.
yeah.
I can all clearly, just
Hmm.
based on this
Hmm.
conversation.
Hmm.
But once again, to reiterate, the new intersection and the real issue with comics and why Afro Futures is needed, and
Hmm.
why honestly, Afro Futures is probably going to have a lot of pushback from those white conservative people who exist at that intersection between superheroes being a white male power fantasy and political extreme, like right wing political extremism.
Hmm.
And I think what you're doing is beautiful because you're the boxing glove. You're punching back against that. You have people out here that are talking about, oh, comics need to be this or comics are this and Marvel sucks, but you're actually out here creating shit. And I think
Yeah. Well, that's the
that,
distinction, right?
yeah, but that's an important distinction
Yeah.
because what I also think is wrong, and it goes back to what you were saying about content. You have a lot of content, but you don't have a lot of quality content. What
Mm.
you're doing, what you've been doing all these years, is making quality content.
Been trying to, man. Been
No, you're
trying
not
to.
trying. You are. You are.
Yeah.
You are. Oh, you are, dog. Like you are making just once again. We're talking about intersectionality and what you're
Yeah.
doing. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like you can't. You're taking. Dude, you wrote a book. With I think Chuck D was involved with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm like these nerdy motherfuckers on the internet that are bitching and complaining about Blade. They can't say that. You can say that.
No, that's fair. Right.
So
All right.
you exist, and also too, when I do these podcasts and I have creators on, I'm always building y'all up. Like I'm your biggest fans because I love to see people create and do shit
Well,
that
yeah.
matters. You
Yeah.
know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Not just like shaking their ass on Instagram or like punching
Right.
somebody in a
Yeah.
club and then playing a clip of it. You know what
Man,
I'm
I
saying?
saw. Sorry, this is a total aside. It just really resonated. Well, it just kind of really struck me earlier this morning. I guess Ice Spice was at the BET Awards. I think it was.
Mhm.
And I have only known Ice Spice to be the orange Afro girl who shakes her ass. That's all I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And usually I just flip the channel, whatever. I just go to or I scroll away,
Yeah.
Um, and they add like she was on the red carpet and someone asked her a question, and her answer was so stately and so precise, and I saw people in the comments saying, "Oh, the media training is paying off. The media training's paying off." And I found that really interesting because I don't know, it just kind of struck me because you were just talking about being on Instagram shaking your ass, right? But it just
Yeah.
found it really interesting because I kind of had this moment like, man, we really have extracted the personality from the artist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we really have like
Ours.
this whole, and I mean, I really thought about this recently. I was like, man, like we used to have entertainers and we didn't look to them for political views. Like, you know what I mean? I remember MC Hammer being on Arsenio Hall when right around the time that I think it was Clinton versus Bush.
Yeah.
Um, and MC Hammer was Arsenio asked him, well, who are you voting for? And Hammer didn't respond. He just basically you know, like just kind of sidestepped the
Yeah.
conversation. But he didn't even like he just didn't answer. He didn't even like indirectly answer it. He just was kind of like, oh, I'm not gonna say, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it's really interesting that like to your point, our political discourse has kind of shifted this thing. So it's like you can either be an entertainer, which is outmoded now, right? Or you can be an influencer, right?
Mm.
And like really think about those two words, right? Entertainers entertain. We don't ask for anything else from them except for them to entertain us.
And money.
That's
No, well,
it.
no, well, they ask us for money, but yeah, yeah.
Right. They ask us for
Yeah.
money, right? But we don't ask for anything else but for them to entertain us, right? Influencers influence. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a real. Oh, jeez, holy shit! Sorry, I'm
Technical
gesturing too
difficulties.
much.
Technical
I'm,
difficulties, but
I'm
yeah.
gesturing. I'm gesturing way too much. Apparently, see, I'm getting all passionate about this.
No, that's
Um,
great. You're gonna keep that in and keep it raw.
yeah, keep it rolling. That's fine. That's all right. And yeah, I just find it interesting that we've made that transition. Like, we really didn't ask for much more from the people that were on the screen outside of distract us for a little bit, you
Yeah,
know? And now we're looking to them for answers. And I find that a little troubling.
I do too, and I have strong opinions about that because
Mhm.
much like you are, I'm on the internet. You know what I mean? Like as a consumer of ideas and things like that, and as a content creator, I guess that's what I am, right? I make content,
Yeah,
and a lot
right.
of times I'll make
I
videos.
make content, like, I mean,
Yeah,
it is
exactly. Like we're creators. Like, you know what I'm
right.
saying? Like my original background was to be a comic book writer and artist. So like this, what I do now is just transitioning into that. One day I might start writing
Right.
again. But anyway,
Hmm.
I had an interaction with somebody on social media and they were martial artists. Like for people that don't know, I dabble in martial arts off and on throughout my life, right? And she was like, it was like a little cute black girl with like in booty shorts spinning nunchucks and shit. And
Mhm.
I commented on her post. I was like, oh, if you grip the weapon this way, you can generate more kime. Kime is Japanese word for force or power.
Right. Yeah.
And she was sort of like, you don't know nothing about no martial. Like, you did it. And she started kind of going in on me. And I'm like, ma'am, I'm like 40, well, 43 Friday. Like, I'm old enough to be your father, sweetie. Like, I'm quite sure I know a thing or two about what I'm talking about. But it's always that, right? Because I give a prime example. I made a post about Blade that you reshared, and it was about Blade and intersectionality. And the nerds, they lit me up.
Yeah.
And they
Right. Yeah. I
called me all
saw that.
type. Yeah,
I saw that.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I wasn't offended by it. I was just laughing. I'm like, this is what social media influencer culture has created.
It's
It's
creative,
created
man.
a culture who have a valid perspective are ignored for people who dangle things. You know what I'm saying? Like dangle their ass or
Right.
dangle. Once again, and I'm not smearing anybody's name, but there was a content creator that you had mentioned earlier. I'm not going to repeat their name because
Mhm.
I don't. You know, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're a YouTuber and they make comments and they're black
Hmm.
and their opinions are not valid in like 80% of the
No.
time. But
No.
it's sensationalism, and that's what people are
Yep.
gravitating towards.
Yep.
Entertainment has become hyper sensationalized. Entertainment was always sensational,
It was always.
always.
Yeah. Of course. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
But the one thing I'll say about entertainment, and I'm gonna talk about the MC Hammer thing too, because I have an interesting perspective. Now I agree with you, but there's a flip side to that. So
There is. No. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
entertainment can be sensationalism with substance.
Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
think about comic book movies, right? And this I'm the biggest fan of defending comic book movies as valid forms of entertainment
Hmm.
and defending comic books as valid forms of literature because they
Hmm.
are. In fact,
Hmm.
they're one of the most valid forms of literature because comic books possess the highest level of art that you can
Oh
get
yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And some of the most politically potent writing, V for Vendetta, Dark Knight Returns,
Yeah.
Watchmen, The
Hmm.
Truth, Captain America, which is a very, very progressive book, I guess, if that's
Yep.
the right term, that people don't really talk about anymore.
No.
But you know what I mean?
Well,
It
it
was
got it
just
got
like
it got a little shine when that
it
Falcon
got
and Winter Soldier
it got
show
shine when it
popped
came
up.
out. And then yeah, when the TV show, the
Yeah.
Falcon show came out, yeah. But what we have now is the reason I have an issue with content creators is because creating content doesn't require any type of what's the word I'm looking for? Back in the day, like, all right, if you wanted to rap, you had to go to New York, you had to battle somebody, you had to build a portfolio. But
Yeah.
now the portfolio is not needed. All you got to do is come out the gate and dance on TikTok and say a couple of things, and then you're Logan Paul, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like
Hmm.
with what you do and with what other creators are doing, you guys are really the foundation of what needs to happen with social media and content creation. It needs to be recontextualized to be sensationalism with substance. And
Yeah.
having substance doesn't mean boring, right? Because the Dark Knight has substance, right?
Oh yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one of the
Absolutely. Yeah.
most movies, the Marvel dog. I tell people this all the time. Anytime somebody says like the Marvel movies are dumb and Avengers is dumb, I'm like, Thanos was recontextualized to be Neo Malthusian. Look
Okay.
up,
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Okay. Okay. All
yeah.
right.
Like, I'm not gonna go into Thomas Malthus and all and population
Yeah.
extermination.
Control. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But
Yeah.
that's Thanos because Thanos
Uh,
wasn't like that in the comics. Thanos
no, he
was
wasn't. No.
choreographed. Yeah, but
Mm.
they recontextualized him to be a villain whose main agenda is really rooted in socioeconomics. You know what I mean?
You
Like
want to. You want to. You want to get weird for a second, man.
always.
I had this weird moment. I was like, I'm not gonna follow this logic because now I just sound like a conspiracy theorist. First of all, I love Infinity War. I love Endgame. I think that was the best possible outcome for this long stretch of 10 years of films, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I had a thought. I had a thought like not too long ago. I was like, man, okay, so Infinity War and Endgame. This to your point about Neo. I'm sorry. Say it again.
Malthusianism,
Malthusianism.
Malthusianism.
Malthusianism. Malthusianism.
That's okay.
Malthusianism. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Sorry. But yeah, actually, the reason I know about this is I was reading about and I definitely don't know how to pronounce his name, but I was reading about Bernays, and there was some stuff about Bernays that like worked into that at the same time. Um, but I thought it was really interesting that we have this villain that's dealing with population control, and there's this movie there's this two-part movie that runs from 2018 to 2019, right?
Mhm.
And then 2020, COVID happens.
Ooh, so no, we're gonna get really weird, right?
Yeah.
So the COVID pandemic is well, this is my channel. I can say whatever I want. I had a theory that I kicked a minute ago when people said I was out of my mind. COVID, in my mind, it was Malthusianism
Mm,
because Malthusianism, the premise of Malthusianism is that a particular portion of the population needs to be exterminated in order to preserve resources for the upper
Upper
class.
class, right? Yeah.
So when COVID first happened, the first people they was getting it was like poor people and old people,
Hmm.
people that don't really fuel the economy like that, right? Especially older people.
Hmm.
The older people were dying off, and
Hmm.
older people don't contribute to the economy
And
in
it
the way
literally,
that younger people do.
right? It literally
Now,
targeted older people.
yeah, I don't know if they targeted, but
Well, I'm not saying they target. I'm just
no,
saying the.
I know. No,
Yeah.
I'm
You got to be careful, right?
yeah, that's why I'm clarifying. I'm not saying you're saying that, but sometimes people read
Right.
into stuff and it's like that
Right.
ain't what my man said.
Right.
But
Right. Not what I
yeah,
said.
so but with Malthusianism, right? And then you have the COVID pandemic affecting poor people and older people, people who are not considered essential to the economy to thrive. And then they were like the upper class wasn't dealing with COVID the way that like poor working class people were. And
Hmm.
I found that very interesting. And
Very interesting, right?
that's very Malthusian. And so is AIDS. AIDS is definitely like
Hmm.
neo-Malthusian. So once
Hmm.
again, you have Thanos, this villain that big purple buff Homer Simpson looking ass motherfucker, but he's snapping people out of existence randomly. It's
Yeah,
nihilistic
randomly.
Malthusianism.
Hmm.
And when people say like comic book movies are stupid, I'm like, you must didn't watch The Winter
Right.
Soldier.
Not at all. Right. Yeah. Not at all.
Like
Right.
fantasy movies, and to take it back to Afro Futures, I'm always going to circle it back to
Yeah.
that.
Please. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So when we're dealing with concepts of anything involving fantasy and sci-fi, you're dealing with high concepts
Hmm.
because I refuse to
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
that we live in a society that thinks Forrest Gump is more intellectually rich than Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, especially
Right.
considering what I just said. Or even a movie like Black Panther that deals with diaspora theory. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah.
These are
Yeah. Yeah.
all socio-political concepts. And
Right.
the Marvel Cinematic Universe is built around that
Oh
more
yeah.
so than the previous Marvel movies. Like Punisher wasn't about shit with Thomas Jane,
No.
neither was
No.
Warzone.
No.
Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire wasn't really, it was a love story.
It
It
was
was
love story.
Dawson's Creek in tights. You know what I'm
Oh yeah.
saying? Like,
100%. Right. I mean,
yeah,
the X-Men movies had like by default have to, have to have some of that baked into it, like the social political stuff.
yeah,
But even that is, you've probably seen me post about the X-Men movies and how I'm not a fan of those films because of just how half-hearted I kind of feel like a lot of that stuff is presented. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, I'm definitely. I mean, it's that I think to me that's the thing that I actually do love about the MCU, right? Because if you look at the genesis of the MCU and you look at what the creators are saying, right? The filmmakers are saying, right?
Mhm.
And you look at the connection back to the comics, right? Because these aren't one for one adaptations of the comics. They aren't, right?
Mm-mm.
But there's bits and pieces in there a lot of times, more often than not, that echo back to the larger point of the comic book that it's based on. And so, I'm always hesitant to say, I'm always hesitant to go in the direction of, the Avengers are paramilitary, et cetera, right? I'm always hesitant to do that, right?
Yeah,
Just because I think that it does undercut what the filmmakers are actively saying in those films. Like The Winter Soldier, I don't know if people remember this. Obama got in trouble around the same time because of data breaches with AT&T. And T.
yeah.
And then The Winter Soldier ends up doing a whole story about targeting people through a data breach, right?
Well, they did that in the Dark Knight too with
Yes. Oh yeah.
with the
Right.
Patriot Act. Yeah,
Right. The Patriot Act, right. And so I just always found that interesting and fascinating. The Dark Knight, I feel like, doesn't like. I mean, here's the thing: they both hang them as plot devices, right? But at least they're addressing something.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Dark Knight only kind of introduces that and then walks it back immediately, right? Now
Yeah,
it's
no,
interesting
yeah.
that it comes from Batman. Like he's the source of that.
Yes. Well,
You know?
I read somewhere, and I could be wrong. Somebody in the comments is going to check me on it anyway. But
Mhm.
the Dark Knight was supposed to be a 9/11 allegory, in the same way that the Dark Knight Rises was a class allegory. It was like the
Yeah.
Tale of Two Cities
Tale
with
of Two Cities,
Dickens.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So once again, and we know this because we study things other than comics, and I
You're
think
right. Yeah. Yeah.
going back to the whole fanatical thing
Mhm.
with comic book fans, or and let me not isolate comic book fans. Let me say comic book fan bases who whose whole personality and appreciation of comics is rooted in bigotry.
Well,
Because
I think it's. I mean, you can be even more broader than that. I think it's just the current state of nerd culture. Period.
yeah,
Like, you know what I
once again,
mean? Like, it's video games,
intersection.
comic books, Game of Thrones nerds. Like, it's all that stuff. And
Yeah.
we're also in a space now where, well, my bad. I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry, guys.
No, no, you not no, no, talk your shit, dog. Like this is yeah, you
But I was just saying we're also in this space now where this hyper, we're in this. I have a running joke with my friend about like he always says cyberpunk is now. It just doesn't look as cool, right?
yeah.
And it's and like I agree with him because like we exist in this hyper consumer hyper consumerism like reality where people really overly identify with these things that are really just meant to be distractions, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's really what their intention was. They are art, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but they are also for the average person that pays bills, has a 9 to 5, or like works at Walmart or whatever. Going to the movies is just a distraction, right?
Def-
And yeah, I think we've been in this space for like the last 20 something years now, where we've we're overly relating to fiction, but we're also overly relating to all other forms of branding, like whether it be sports teams, whether it be Donald Trump, because don't get it twisted, Donald Trump is a brand, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
Um, whether it's like people like having like meltdowns over the end of Game of Thrones or any of that stuff, like we've really we've really internalized this stuff aggressively. And I truthfully, to me, the smoking gun is how these things were marketed to us 20 years ago. Like
Yeah.
to me, that's what it is. Like
Yeah.
because the thing you have to understand, I work in marketing. The thing that I really had to grow and understand, especially in the age of the internet, because marketing really has changed in the last like 20, 30 years. The thing that I've always noted is like marketing is a form of manipulation, right? And there's the good kind and the bad kind, right? Like there's a good kind of like, oh, what's the joke? You'll watch a commercial for a drug, right? And what are they doing? They're all skipping in the field and they're all hugging each other and meanwhile they're telling you like this thing could cause like explosive diarrhea and like, might cause like seizures and blah blah blah. But the imagery is manipulating you, right? So that's one form of it, right? And the other form of it is okay, you go see if Steven Spielberg gets accused, used to get accused of this all the time. You go see a Steven Spielberg movie, and you'll get a scene like in Schindler's List where the little girl with the red coat, like you see her and she's the only thing that's like in color in the film, and then you see that red coat on a pile of dead bodies later on in the movie, like you know what I mean, like but that serves a narrative purpose. It is a manipulation, but it's a masterful manipulation, and it is an artistic manipulation, right? And so marketing can do that too, right? But unfortunately, I think that we've gone too much in the other direction with this, where it's manipulation, and we've bought into it wholeheartedly, and the internet is a large social engineering experiment, right? And so we get siloed into these. Now we have the algorithm, right? The mighty algorithm. We've gotten siloed into these demographics, these groups, right? We turn on Netflix. Netflix says, "Oh, this is what you want to watch based off all the other stuff you watch," and you're sort of like, "Well, I mean, I want to watch other shit too. Like, I want to discover some things, which is." And so we're in the space now where that manipulation really has taken hold of the culture, and so it permeates everything. It's the culture war, right? It's the online personalities. It's the way that we just engage and talk about Star Wars, you know, and yeah,
Yeah. You know
yeah.
what? Like when you saying that, it reminds me of professional wrestling. And I used to be a big
Oh
wrestling
yeah,
fan, like 20
oh yeah,
years.
oh
And
yeah.
what was interesting about wrestling is
Hmm.
wrestling was built on archetypes.
Yeah.
So Hulk
Hmm.
Hogan was the American
It's
ideal
American hero.
archetype.
Hmm.
Bret
I am.
Hart Bret Hart was like the next extension of that. Shawn Michaels was the rebel. Stone Cold was the
Right.
furthest extreme of that. And
Yep.
it draws you in because all entertainment has a level of self-insertion. You know what I
Yeah. Yeah.
mean?
Right. Yeah.
Because it's how
Sure.
we connect the character. Like
Hmm.
I used to study screenwriting, and when I was learning how to write like scripts and stories, they always said like character is really the foundation. Don't worry about plot. Plot is
Right.
a thing. It's plot. People don't connect the plot. People connect
No
the character,
character. Yep.
and people connect the character because characters are vessels for emotions, and
Yes.
all relationships are emotional relationships. We
Yep.
connect through feelings of
Mm.
positive emotions, negative emotions, and things like that.
Yeah.
And with what you're describing about marketing, it's the exploitation of that. You
Yeah.
know what I
Oh yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah.
Like movies make you feel a certain way. It's one of the reasons why nerd rage exists.
Oh yeah.
There should be no reason for nerd rage. Nobody should be mad at a Blade movie.
No.
Nobody should be mad at David, what's his name? David Corn Sweat and James Gunn over Superman because
All right.
they they didn't make the movie. Like it's James Gunn's movie. Are you
Right.
if you're mad about what he does in his personal life, if you're not gonna go and punch him in the mouth, then shut the fuck up about it.
Shut the
Like
fuck up about
straight
it.
up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But people latch onto things emotionally. And to add on to what you're saying about the internet, because the nature of celebrity has changed from a person who supposedly represents exceptionalism in the form of a talent or whatever, exceptionalism got swapped out for popularity. And popularity doesn't really require exceptionalism. You know
No.
what I mean? I see
No.
tons of mediocre motherfuckers with blue checks behind their names on
No. Right.
Twitter. You know
Right.
what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
But now people have clung to that. They've clung to a form of exceptionalism that's rooted in mediocrity. So
Yes. Yeah.
that has changed the way that we interact with each other as human beings, but also how we interact with entertainment. And to take it full circle, back to Afro
Mm.
Futures,
Yeah.
what you're doing is creating. Honestly, I'm glad that you mentioned heavy metal because when I was reading over the stuff, I'm like, dog, this felt like hip hop, funk, heavy metal, kind of,
Yeah.
sort of.
Oh yeah.
You know
Absolutely.
what I mean?
100%.
And I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's dope because we haven't seen that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes.
Heavy metal was popular, but it
Hmm.
wasn't like pop. You know what I mean? It was
Well,
like
it's. I mean, but that's also kind of what I'm going for here in a lot of ways. Like, I want the underground aspect of it because I feel like when you when you go that route, you really are allowed to experiment more, right?
you are, yeah.
Because the
Hmm.
minute you go pop, it has to follow a formula, right?
And that's why I didn't mean to cut you off, but I
No,
just want
no,
to
yeah,
say
no,
this about underground. Like I think about underground hip hop and the difference in underground hip hop fans versus mainstream hip hop fans. It's the difference between a 50 Cent fan and an MF Doom fan, right?
right.
And it's a whole different type of energy because
Yeah.
underground is more personal, I feel, or it's a different type of personal.
Hmm.
So to me, underground is where like the rawest, most true to itself version of art can exist
Yeah.
because you don't have to go through the barriers of trying to appeal to a massive demographic who has a passing interest in what you're doing. With
Hmm.
underground, you have to search that shit out. And that's one
Yeah.
of the beauty, that was the
Yeah.
beauty of comics at one point,
Yes.
where
Hmm.
when I was growing up and collecting comics in the 80s and the 90s or whatever, I had to find comic book stores. I couldn't
Right.
go out and
Hmm.
like use a movie to learn about like Ghost Rider or even the X-Men because I
Hmm.
discovered the X-Men before the animated series.
Yeah.
And I
Same.
like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's like, you go and you be digging through box like, oh, who the fuck is John Romita and who the fuck
You're
is
right.
John Byrne? And it
Mhm.
was like a whole new world, and it felt like it was your world,
Yeah.
and you could share it with people, but it wasn't like people who have a passing interest in it, kind of
Right.
diluting what you know what I'm saying? And me honestly, I think that's kind of the problem with comics now is that because comics isn't so niche,
Hmm.
there's a dilution of quality with what gets put out because now everything is trying to chase that
Oh
same
yeah,
algorithm.
yeah. No, yeah. I mean, and like it's. I mean, you see it. I mean, you can literally see how comics are marketed right now.
Yeah.
The last couple of years, it's been, the fans have been butting heads with like Marvel and DC whenever the marketing release for a new character is like, this is the first Islamic, character that Marvel's ever created. And they're like, no, 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 no. There was a Captain Britain in 2003. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, no, no. Dust was in the new X-Men. Like, you know what I mean? And so, and the reason they're doing that is because they're chasing. The reason that that Marvel's doing that, right? The marketing of Marvel's doing that is because they're chasing the algorithm,
Yeah.
right? They're chasing the algorithm. They're knowing that if we put this in the press release, and then that press release goes online, because that's where everything is marketed now these days, right? The days of Joe Quesada on the Daily Show are over, right? Um, uh, they market, and like that goes online. Those particular keywords are going to get a reaction and are going to go further online. Um,
Yeah.
it's a real thing. Yeah, I feel like it's 100% a real thing, and it's really fascinating to kind of see the world of popular culture eat itself. It really does feel like a snake eating its tail at this point. And I'm encompassing everything. Like, yeah, I don't want to pick on comic book nerds because I do consider comic book nerds still my people. I also consider them those my people. But at the same time, it's the problem isn't, like you said, isn't just comics. It's a larger issue that has infected how we talk about entertainment.
Yeah. That's real. That's
Yeah.
yeah. And once again, that's why I'm glad we get to have conversations like this because I feel like conversations like this
Hmm.
are the next should be the next evolution in how we discuss entertainment because you don't have to be too smart to fart about the shit, but you
Hmm.
also can't be, dumb about it. You know what I mean? Like you have
Right.
to have
Yeah.
a nice balance because I think entertainment at its best is balance. To get
Oh yeah.
back to Marvel,
Yeah.
Marvel makes very thought-provoking movies. I stand on that. But
I'm
they
saying on
also
that
make
too. Yeah.
they make popcorn flicks,
They
you know what
also
I mean,
make
at the same
popcorn
time.
flicks, right? Hmm.
And I think that's why they were successful for so long because they were hitting multiple demographics. And that's
Yes.
what you have to do. I think that and so my bad. I'm gonna skate back to the MC Hammer thing, right? When
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
mentioned like him on Arsenio Hall, I think that's very important because at the same time that MC Hammer was like on that wave, KRS-One was on Arsenio Hall talking about like what KRS-One was talking
You're
about at the
talking
time.
about
You
right.
know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Hmm.
So it should always be that balance. You should always have
Both sides.
Ice. Yeah, is Ice Spice is cool,
Hmm.
Kendrick Lamar is cool, and they
Hmm.
exist
And
in
this thing.
different spaces.
Yeah.
So like you can go to one when you want one thing, and you can go to the
Hmm.
other when you need the other thing. And
Yeah.
sometimes you might want to see a fat old ass shaking on Instagram. You might just need that. That might be a form of catharsis. But sometimes
Uh,
you might need what Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole and them is doing. You know what I'm saying?
right.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
like life is all about balance. And to kind of take it back to the other thing we was talking about earlier
Hmm.
about like nerd culture being fanatical and fanaticism being an extreme. I
Hmm.
view fanaticism as a form of it's honestly it's sociopathic. You know what I mean? Because
Oh yeah.
it's
That
it's
borders on it.
not
Yeah.
mentally healthy to be that
No.
obsessively into something
No.
where you're like condemning people to death because they drew a fucking picture or they
Right.
wrote some words from Captain America's mouth. It's like that's
Yeah.
not a healthy thing.
No.
And I think what needs to happen, and I think what Afro Futures can do, is
Hmm.
create a climate where balance is brought back as something that is the standard, as
Hmm.
opposed to the exception. I think I look at possibilities
Yeah. Yeah.
when it comes to what art can do because I think art is one of the greatest gifts of that mankind has. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like
It's our creativity has given us, has provided us with so much. I tell, at the end of the day, we're tool using primates, right?
yeah,
Like, and part of that tool using is the reason that we were able to evolve past like animals, but it's also given us things like creativity. It's the reason that we can invent the wheel. It's the reason that we can invent the hammer. It's also the reason we can invent the bomb, right? And it's really it's very difficult to have conversations around, well, what everybody needs to stop doing, right? Because there's no way you can ever get everybody to stop doing a thing, right?
No.
But what you can do is um, acknowledge the I don't even want to say the basic truths, but like acknowledge the acknowledge the direction, the potential disastrous direction that things are going, right? And
Mhm.
remind people of how we used to be and how we used to engage with things. And some people say, "Oh, well, you sound like like the white supremacists, like, oh, we want to get back to, you sound like make America great again, like, like go back to the 50s when everything was great." And it's like, well, the 50s weren't great for everybody, guys.
No.
you know. But I'm not oblivious to that fact. But at the same time, I think that our how we engage with things and being critical of that, our media literacy is
Mhm.
super important. It's incredibly important. It's because we are being manipulated. And, you know, I know that sounds like conspiratorial, but that's also kind of where I live, guys.
but hold up. But the other thing too is a conspiracy theory is not a bad thing.
It's not
Conspiracy
a bad
theories
thing.
exist for a reason.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories become problematic when they're based on absurdist conjecture, I guess. If you want to, what I'm saying? Like, oh, the frogs are making kids gay.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
we're not gonna do that,
Not going to
right?
do that. Right. Yeah.
But we can have a conversation about marketing schemes and how
Sure.
marketing schemes influence like the psychology of human beings and how
Right.
that factors into a lot of different things like capitalism, consumerism,
Yep.
racism, sexism, all of those things. And
Right. Yeah.
to even add this layer to the conversation about media manipulation and media literacy, I think one of the reasons that media illiteracy runs so rampant is because, and I'm not picking on nerd demographics. It's because a lot of nerds only consume their media. It's like comic book nerds just read comic books. They don't read anything else. They don't read about sexism. They don't know about bell hooks. They don't know
Right.
about
Yeah.
Gloria Steinem. They don't know about Cornel West. They don't know about Michael Eric Dyson. So when we're having these conversations about comics and we start to venture into that part of it, it's
Hmm.
foreign to them. There's a disconnect because they don't associate entertainment with also being socio-politically charged, which it very much is.
Yes.
All entertainment is a response to something socio-political or
It's response to something.
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean?
exactly. Yeah, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
My bad. Go ahead. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
no, no. I was gonna say, like, I always, I always try to walk the line between saying everything's political, right? Because I don't think that's necessarily true. But I do think that all art is a response to something, right? And a lot of things are a response to social political acts.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I you know, I've used the example. I kind of feel like how what you might say to this, but like I've always used the example where Rob Liefeld was making Deadpool. He was just fucking around.
Yeah.
You're like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Now, is Deadpool kind of paramilitary? Yeah, he is. Right? Like he has that aspect to him as well, right? But I always go back to the actual intention of what the creator was doing. What the culture did with it and glummed onto it and ran with, that's a whole nother conversation.
It is. And this is my add-on to that because I'm one dog. I have like I had a first appearance of Deadpool. I think I had a first appearance of Cable in here, but
Mm,
Deadpool being paramilitary is not rooted in Rob Liefeld having a political agenda. It's
right.
actually it's rooted in him misunderstanding the context
Hmm.
of some other shit. Because
Right, right.
Deadpool, and characters like Cable and all of those guys, they
Mm,
are responses to characters like Deathstroke, the Terminator, and the
yeah,
Comedian and shit like that.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't say Deathstroke is a political character, but actually technically he is because he was like
Technically,
a government experiment. He's like evil
right.
Captain America. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he's also a pedophile, but we ain't gonna talk about that right now. But
Yeah, yeah.
but Rob
I mean,
Liefeld,
villains are gonna be villains. That's how I say
yeah,
it.
I mean it's a character drawn on paper. I'm
Right,
not offended by that because
right,
I'm yeah, but Rob Liefeld creating characters like Cable and Deadpool as these hyper militarized anti superheroes, that's not political. That's not a political agenda. That's
Hmm.
just misunderstanding the text and also satirizing it because
And
Deadpool,
also satirizing, right? Yeah,
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 it's satire. So
yeah.
satire is political. So
Right.
when we say all entertainment is political, it's either done covertly with like direct intention, or well, it's done with direct intention, or it's done on accident
On accident, right? Yeah.
yeah, like
That's
with
fair. Which is
another
fair.
agenda. You know what I'm
Which is
saying?
fair.
Because
Yeah,
the beauty of comics, and I think it's a beauty that fans underappreciate, is that comic books is the only form of literature that constantly recontextualizes itself.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
The only form. Like I
Only
was I
form,
was
right?
talking to my friend Darius, who actually helped me start this channel, OmniFrame, shout out to him. Um, I was talking to him about Superman because I think he was saying something about Batman being the most revised or revisioned character in comics, and I'm like, no, it's actually Superman, because
Yeah.
Superman by Siegel and Schuster is not George Reeves, it's not
No.
Bruce Timm Superman, it's not
No.
Christopher. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you could literally go down the 80 plus years that Superman has existed,
Hmm.
and every 5 years there's a different version of that motherfucker
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that represents a lot of different things. And I think
Right.
Joe Eilich had wrote something on Facebook the other day about Superman and people kind of misinterpreting what
Oh,
Superman is
really?
supposed to represent. And I'm like, yes, I'm agreeing with them. And they were in the comments disagreeing with him, saying like, no, Superman is corny and old fashioned. And it's like, no, he's really not. It's
No.
just
No.
y'all didn't study, y'all didn't go back and look at what Superman represents throughout the generations.
Right.
It's
Well, I
like,
mean, but it also is like another, and again, it's that overly relating, over the need to overly relate to a thing, right?
yeah,
Like he's not like me, so he's corny.
exactly. Or
Or he's not
Superman,
how I perceive myself, I should say. So
there's
he's
that.
corny. Right.
There's definitely that, but there's also Superman doesn't embody the type of heroism that's in today's
Yeah.
standard because
Right.
once again, the past 30 years, most superheroes have been very paramilitary or
Hmm.
military adjacent. The
Hmm.
ones that are popular, Wolverine is military,
Yeah.
Punisher is military,
Right.
X-Men paramilitary, Avengers,
Hmm.
Justice League, all of them have become paramilitary or direct military because in the 80s during Reaganism and that jingoistic era of culture,
Hmm.
movie stars became military
Super
motherfuckers.
militarized. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Absolutely.
went from Dirty Harry to Rambo to
Hmm.
whatever the fuck Arnold Schwarzenegger was doing.
Right.
Jean-Claude
Hmm.
Van Damme, he played
Hmm.
soldiers all the time and shit like
All the
that.
time. Right. Yeah.
Steven Seagal played cops, and cops are very paramilitary. So
Hmm.
it goes back to what I was saying. Like heroism exists either on a mythic scale
Hmm.
or on a militarized scale.
Hmm.
And because Superman exists more on the mythic
Mythic
scale,
scale. Right.
and it's very hard to militarize Superman. They kind
Hmm.
of did it with Superman Red Sun,
Yeah.
but
Right. Right. But that's Elseworld. So.
it's also, yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
when people are saying Superman is irrelevant and Deadpool is more relevant, what they're really saying is the version of heroism that I like is a version of a hero that's more like the cops that beat up Rodney King or the
Hmm.
soldier that shot up some shit in the Middle East,
In
as
Houston.
opposed to,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like a hero with a gun versus a hero that's bulletproof.
Hmm.
You know what
All
I
right.
mean? And
All right.
that's
Yeah. Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's interesting. 'Cause they even tried to make Luke Cage a cop in the TV show, and I'm like, why are you doing this? Like Luke Cage was a gang member. Like, why would you make him a cop? That's
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. I didn't think about that before, but yeah, you got a valid point there. Um, Let me ask you this then: like, where does Spider-Man fall on that scale?
Spider-Man is mythic.
Okay, gotcha. Right. Right.
Yeah, and you probably would believe that I would do. I actually wrote a scale of heroes that are mythic and heroes that are
Okay.
militarized.
I would
You
love
know
to
what I
see
mean?
that. Actually. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's Spider-Man, mythic,
Mhm.
Superman, mythic, Batman, militarized. You
Mhm.
know what I mean?
Mhm.
X-Men, militarized. The X-Men fly around in a motherfucking jet
Jet. Right. Yeah.
with a
They
bunch
fly.
of
They fly around in an actual military jet. The Blackbird, I think, is an actual military jet. So yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
and once again, to take it back, I would actually say this whole intersection between the Patriot superhero and right-wing, perspectives about what heroism represents,
Hmm.
that's not something that social media created. That was a thing that was already in existence
Yeah. Yeah.
30 years ago when Frank
Yeah.
Miller gave Batman a tank as the
Yeah.
Batmobile.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan didn't start that. Like Frank Miller started that.
Frank Miller's Well, I mean, we can actually go a little bit further back. Like that, that's the interesting thing about the MCU depiction of the Avengers, and I think people kind of miss this sometimes, is that process of we work for Shield, we don't work for Shield, right? That concept played out in the comic books.
Yep.
Like it was more directly the Avengers were run by the government. Henry Peter Gyrick, right?
Yep.
He was their liaison or whatever
Liaison,
between
yep.
the government, right? And then shit went south, right? And then they disassociated themselves from the government. And previous to that, they weren't in the government. Like there was a long stretch, like I think during the Stanley years, where they weren't. And then there's
No,
I think I want to say it's like the late '70s.
the 80s,
When
because Henry Peter Gyrick
was the
became
'80s, right?
involved with the Avengers during the 80s era when it was like Beast was a member of the team, and
Right. Yeah.
like the issue where Hawkeye is firing like was that Hank Pym
Ant-Man.
off
Ant-Man.
the
Yeah.
air?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
right. And so that transition happens, and we see that play out in other forms of media, like the Ultimates,
yeah.
which I to this day, like people are like, oh, the Ultimates is nihilistic and blah blah blah. I'm like, the Ultimates is making fun of
Satire.
2000s politics.
Yeah.
Like, keep in mind that both the artist and the writer are not American.
So
You know?
to go back,
Yeah.
it's people understanding intentionality because
Hmm.
if and this is all right with
Yeah.
art, if you don't understand intentionality, it creates Eric July's. Because I remember Eric July made a video and
Really.
he was like, "Oh, the X-Men weren't woke. That's not what Stan Lee was doing." And I'm like,
That is embarrassing that he
the,
thinks
the
that.
X-Men are literally disenfranchised mutants, even though they're technically not disenfranchised because they live in a fucking mansion. But
Right. Yeah.
you get what I'm saying? Like to disconnect a socio-political theme from the X-Men because you want to be 5 years old for the rest of your life,
Life. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that's your prerogative, but that's not the intention of the thing. The intention is
Right.
that these characters were made to represent a specific thing. Fun fact, the X-Men civil rights video I made it because of him.
Oh,
Like
really? Interesting.
yes, I
Okay.
made that because I watched him say that shit and I was like, what the fuck is he
Yeah. No. No.
like
Yeah.
but shout
I've
out to
had those. I've had those conversations too, where I'm like talking to somebody. I'm like, whoa, whoa, wait, whoa. But the X-Men. You want to run down this list of things that aren't political? The X-Men is not it. Like you can take that off your list.
like I said,
Like, yeah.
in my mind, all superheroes are political statements.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean they're aligned with a political agenda,
Agenda.
but
Right.
they're a political statement. They
Mhm.
definitely are. Superman being like created during like what the Depression era.
Yeah.
No, like that motherfucker
Well,
was
no,
tossing like Teamsters out of windows.
right.
Like
Yeah, I was about to say.
that's a
Yeah.
political statement. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like,
He
you know what
was
I mean?
like
Like,
he was chasing after like landlords that were abusing tenants. Right. Yeah.
yeah, it's in. And somebody tried to like. I made a post about Dragon Ball Z being political, and somebody was like, "No, it's not. It's Dragon Ball Z." And I'm like, in Dragon Ball, Goku literally fights the Red Ribbon Army, which are Nazis. They're a Nazi analog.
Okay. Interesting. Uh-huh.
They're not like some shit that was just made to fuck up. He fucking Frieza. Frieza's a political statement. Frieza
Right.
is a racist neo-colonialist. It's a political statement.
Interesting. Okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And Vegeta is an extension of that.
Mm.
Vegeta is the precursor to what they did with Eric Killmonger. Even though I know they were basing elements of Killmonger in the movie off of Vegeta,
Hmm.
but Vegeta
Yeah.
is a
Right.
he's a victim of diaspora trauma. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying?
Yeah. 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 That's
Yeah,
fair.
like all
That's fair.
it's impossible to separate politics from especially comic books.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy comic books. Like
Right.
what you're saying about the Ultimates. I knew it was satire off rip, but I was also in my 20s
Right.
when that book came out. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't
Right.
like
Yeah.
5 or 12 when
Right.
that book came out. I was like
Mm.
22. And it's like I was
I mean,
already
I was already kind of like I definitely was more politically charged then than I am now. I'll say that. So yeah, absolutely.
no,
Right.
I would be on the subway reading issues of the Ultimates, blasting Immortal Technique. It don't get much more politically charged than
Yeah.
that. You know what I'm saying? Like
You and
I
I
was,
are kind
I
of the
was,
same person. That's so funny.
you know what?
You and I are the same person. That's so funny.
Yeah, and it's weird too because I be having friends like when they see me talking about comics the way that I do, like since when are you like talking about hyper masculine? I'm like, yeah, y'all motherfuckers must not been paying attention. Like I had a book bag filled with comic books, nunchucks, and motherfucking Cornell West books. Like
Mm.
we wasn't on no normal path, bro. Like we like nah, we did all that shit. And it's
Mm.
funny too. because all of that intersects. Like people try to create this disconnect between, oh, martial arts isn't political. I'm like, bro, like I'll be
Wasn't
here all day talking about how it is.
Yeah, well, I'm like, isn't the foundation of martial arts, wasn't it birthed out of defending yourself from political pushback? Like,
One of the biggest, one of the main reasons that kung fu movies got to thrive in like Hong Kong and abroad is
mhm.
because of the Boxer Rebellion. When
Yes,
like
there you go. I was trying to
yeah,
remember. Yeah, there you go. Yes,
yeah, like Beggar So,
yes.
Wong Fei Hong's father, Wong Kei
Wang Fei
Ying,
Hong. Yep.
like yeah, the Boxers Rebellion, and they were a bunch of Chinese kung fu guys that were fighting against British colonialists. And
Right.
honestly, if you pay attention to a lot of the kung fu movies, a lot of
It's
those
right
movies are
there.
right fucking there, but they all they see is, you have offended my family, and it's like, nah, look deeper, bro. Like, look,
Look
it's just,
deeper. Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Like was it was it Ip Man? Is it Ip Man
yep,
that
yep,
kind of jumps into that? And then also like
all of them.
The Chinese connection was it China? No, wait. One of the Bruce Lee movies is very specifically about um
You thinking about Fist of Fury? Fist
Fist
of
of Fury.
Fury,
Yeah.
yeah, with
Yeah.
Chin, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then
Right.
like the Japanese like occupation of China, and then they made like Fist of Legend, a remake. I'd be all day talking about some
That's right.
Fist
Yeah,
of
yeah, 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 yeah.
Fury.
No, I mean, like, I mean, it's so funny to me, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, I was smarter than you when I was 14, like to like the, whoever's watching or whatever. But like, I distinctly remember watching Fist of Fury when I was like, I legit like 14 years old, and the thing that captivated me about it is that it wasn't just, you know, badly dubbed like martial arts movie stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
actually was about something. Like that's the thing that really made me go, "Oh, all right. Okay, that's kind of interesting. I kind of dig that." Like, you know what I mean? It became a different viewing experience for me because of that.
Yeah, we are the same person because I had my political awakening at a very young age, and
Yeah.
the two outlets of my political awakening
Mhm.
was hip hop and
Mhm.
kung fu movies. To be honest, because I had a similar experience watching well, it was called the Chinese Connection when it came here, but it's
Mhm.
really Fist of Fury, and I
Fist
just
of
remember
Fury.
just like, oh shit, this is like different. Like this isn't, you know what I mean? And then just listening to a bunch of hip hop, like listening to J. Rue the Damager and
Yeah.
the fucking Fugees and shit like that. You know what
Yep.
I'm saying?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Like growing up. And the reason I'm mentioning that too is because to go all the way back to the beginning of this conversation where we were talking about how entertainment is now, it's so very shallow. It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
very, it's so very, it's not even what Britney Spears and them was doing. It's like
No.
a lesser version of that. You know what I'm saying? Because
Mhm.
even Britney Spears has something to say, which
Mhm.
I think people forget. You know what I mean? Like she wasn't just like, ooh, baby, baby. It was like she had songs about abortion and shit like that. You know what I'm
She
saying? It's
did.
like,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
like
About
pop,
like how the media treats her and stuff like that. Yeah. Absolutely.
but the media will take something that the media will take black people or black and brown people and women
Mhm.
who are in the forefront and have something to say and completely demonize them and turn them in. They
Mhm.
did that shit with Sinead O'Connor. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
they turned that woman into a goddamn pariah. And I'm like, she
Yeah.
wasn't telling nothing but the truth. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
so once again, to go into like the influencer
Mm.
culture, I'm gonna be honest, like this thing got nothing to do with you. People be DMing me shit all the time from like TikTok and Instagram, and I hate TikTok
I hate
because
TikTok. I hate
because
TikTok.
TikTok, as somebody that's like trying to be a writer, sending me a TikTok video with somebody talking 30 seconds about racism and they don't know what the fuck they talking about, that's like spitting in my face.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like a motherfucker, people will
I
send me
totally get
videos
that.
like with like a dude, he like 22 years old, and he pointing at like text on the screen, like, yeah, did you know that Martin Luther King ended racism in 1976? And I'm like, motherfucker,
And the sad thing is, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. I actually don't have a TikTok for that reason. I think I made one for the publisher Rexco, and I haven't looked at it in like about 3 years. Like
I
yeah, I like just audibly, visually, mentally. I don't like what TikTok does to me. You know, I don't like my brain doesn't like it. And I think that that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that, yes, I am older, right? But a lot of that also has to do with the fact that my brain was raised on, you know, freaking Brian De Palma movies. And
yeah,
like, John Milius and like, John Singleton and the Hughes brothers and Steven Spielberg. And like, so my brain is already kind of used to a certain type of narrative flow.
Yeah, that's. I'm so glad that you mentioned that
Yeah.
because like, so like I just did a video. Like I literally finished it today, right before we did this call,
Mm,
and as I was editing it, it's about X-Men the animated series,
that's
and
right. Yeah.
one of my partners, he was like, "Yo, like you might want to truncate this and shorten this and this, that, and the third." And I'm just like, I'm listening to his analysis because he sometimes he'll help me edit certain shit, and I'm
Mhm.
like, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to make 5 minute video essays because how does that benefit people? You
Yeah.
can't really you can't dissect and analyze something in 5 fucking minutes. You
No.
know what I'm saying? Like because people say that about the straight out of Compton thing. One of my homies like, "Yo, you should have broke this up into 5 minute increments," and I'm like, "No, I shouldn't have
They
because
want the TDLR version, and it's like
no, they don't
that.
do that."
Actually, you know what? That term in itself, I remember I posted something like it was like 3 paragraphs about, I forget where I posted it, but I posted something about, I was basically going off on about like something, an observation I had, and I saw people in the comments going like, does someone have the TDLR version? And then people basically were explaining it to him, and I'm just like, bro, like the amount of time that you took to type that and go back and read what the short version was, you could have just read the fucking thing.
But people, I feel like people don't read, and but people love comics. People don't read fucking comic books. People
They
get
don't
more
even
knowledge
read
from
comic
comics.
book. Bro, okay. This is a whole thing with me, man. Okay, I'm so glad you said this, dude. I oh my god. This is oh, I said this on previews one time and I was like, I shouldn't have said this. But I cannot trust your opinion, right? If you can't even properly understand a comic book movie. And there's a lot of channels out there that are doing a piss poor job of dissecting comic book movies, right? So why would I ever listen to anything you have to say?
Okay, so you already know I'm with you on that, right?
Right.
But I'm gonna be a bit more sympathetic because I know why it is. You got to think about the age that a lot of those YouTubers are.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I'm assuming we're the same age. Like I'm 42,
Hmm.
and you're probably
Yeah,
like
we're same age. Yep.
yeah.
Hmm.
So um, we've been doing this for a minute. I've been collecting comics my entire. I
Yeah.
have like 5 long white boxes in this motherfucker. I got comics stashed in this. I got comics from the 70s. I got comics from the 80s, like
Hmm.
single issues. Like I was collecting comics before motherfuckers was on the graphic novel. I used to. You, I met you in a comic book
Man,
store
comic store. Right. Yeah.
that you
Legit.
used to
Right.
work at. So like,
Right. Right. Right.
yeah. So the way what that style of comic book collecting does, it makes you kind of like an encyclopedia a little bit
It does.
because
I don't think enough is actually examined about that, man. I'm sorry, but go ahead. What are you gonna say?
are you straight? What I was just gonna say,
Mhm.
like collecting comic books that way, because I have younger friends that are into comics and they'll send me shit like, yo, I didn't know that like Psylocke was into Cyclops, and then I'm like, motherfucker, I have that issue, the individual issue of X-Men drawn. I think it was like Andy Kubert drew
Yep.
that shit, and Scott Lobdell,
20. It was Fabian Nicieza.
yeah, Fabian
Uh,
Nicieza, yeah,
was it
yeah,
21, 22, and 23? I know exactly
yeah,
what you're talking about.
exactly. And it's like the newer generation, and I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be on my old man horse, but it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I get it.
the
Yeah.
newer generation doesn't have that because everything is fed to them in a way
Immediately.
that
Yeah.
doesn't require them to have to look for it.
Yeah.
I deal with that with rap music. People be like, yo,
Yeah.
it's a KRS-One song called Why Is That? And that shit went viral recently. And people was like, yo, there's a rap song breaking down like the Black Hebrews and shit like that. And I'm like, this song came out in like 1990.
Andy, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's on the fucking Blueprint album, like the original
Right.
Blueprint
The original Blueprint album. Right.
from
Yeah.
Boogie Down. I have an autographed copy of that. Like
Oh, nice.
you know what I'm
Nice.
saying?
Nice.
Like
Uh-huh.
motherfuckers been into this shit for
Yeah.
their entire
Yeah.
life, and I'm
Well,
4 decades in.
I mean, I know, and I agree with you. I think that, like, we've again, this boils down to everything we've been just discussing about, like, um, just how things are marketed, how we've kind of broken narratives, in the flow of a narrative, uh, and I think that's really interesting because, like, yeah, I agree with you, man, that we've kind of gotten to this point where, oh, I'm sorry, I know what I was going to say. A big thing with me right now, and has been for the last couple of years, is that people don't want to read. And you know how I know people don't want to read? Because even tweets get misinterpreted
All day.
all day. And there's a combination of people don't know how to write and people also don't know how to read, right? But that's definitely an issue, right? And if you can't even dissect or understand something in 140 characters, that is a huge problem. And to bring it back to Afro Futures, I remember a few years ago I got into an argument with somebody online, right? Because I blanket made a blanket statement. It was a bit of a blanket statement, but I also still think that there's some truth in this, which is that we're kind of losing the battle of literacy with the next generation, right? With the which was the next generation, which is actually now the current generation. And someone piped up. I won't say who it was, but someone piped up, and they basically were like, "No, because my kids read Dogman, and my kids read, Raina Taglemeyer, and my kids were reading Harry Potter." I'm like, "That's your kids." Like, you know what I mean? Like, your kids aren't everybody. So that in itself already says to me the you don't understand context, right?
No.
But then it was interesting because as he was going off on me saying that, like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about, a school teacher who happened to be following me, I guess he saw the conversation. And so he chimed in. He was like, no, no, no. He's absolutely right. Like,
Yeah.
please understand that just because your kids are reading these books does not mean that most kids are reading these books. And or I wouldn't even say most kids. Just because of Captain Underpants is at the top of the Amazon list does not equate to all of America's children are well read. That's not the same thing. And he broke it down even further and he beat me to it, which is that particularly in black and brown households, they are being underserved in this department. He's like, I'm a teacher in Florida. Believe me when I say this, you know? And he beat me to it because I was like, the guy who made the comment was white, right? And I was like, right, yeah, 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 right. And like, and that notion stuck with me for so long because I remember, again, I was a kid that read the Style magazine. I was a kid that read. I would ask my mom to pick me up issues of Time, right? You know what I mean? Of course, I was reading comic books at the time as well. And with with Afro Futures, I kind of had to kind of look around and I was like, okay, what made me want to read things
Yeah.
when I was 13, when I was 14, when I was 15? And so I thought to myself, so, okay, I'm seeing a lot of marketing telling parents, and I mean they've always done this, but I'm seeing a lot of marketing that says, um, this is an important for Black parents. This book is important, right? And your child will love this because it's important because it relates to them on a way that in a way that a lot of books don't because it's diverse and it has inclusion in it, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, if you had told me that at 13 that I was going to read this book because it was important and I was going to love it, I would not want to read it.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that's that the things I wanted to read were the things that I wasn't supposed to read, including things like the style section and things like Time magazine, right?
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, I was like, okay, well then what if I make a comics magazine that a kid is not supposed to read? So I immediately said, I'm going to make sure that this magazine is 17 plus.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that wall right there, right? You're not supposed to read this, but I know you'll want to now, right? And why? Because you think you're going to see boobs and violence, and you'll get a little bit of that, sure, right? But you immediately, as a kid, you're like, I want to know what's behind that cover, right? And as an adult, you're going, okay, well, why is it 17 plus? Maybe there's a conversation in here that maybe there's a conversation here. Maybe there's a level of conversation here that I'm not getting from other things, right? Because we see two sides of this. We see the adults who are like, I want Logan and I want Deadpool because rated R superhero movies are necessary for me to enjoy them. All right. And then you get the flip side of that is like, oh, the Marvel movies are for a younger audience, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm sort of like, okay, let's find the middle ground. Let's really give people that middle ground where it's like, maybe this is forbidden fruit. Maybe this is contraband. Like, you know what I mean? And that's how I'm treating Afro Futures.
So one thing, and I don't know how much of Afro Futures I can talk about, but there's also a historical context to what you're doing. And
Yes.
yeah, and like I said, I'm not going to go into the specifics of that because, but I found that to be very interesting that, just somebody like me that's like, I would call myself a comic book historian, I guess. Yeah, yeah. And just like a pop culture historian and just some of the references and some of the homages that you have just made me light up because I'm like, you're referencing things that are essential to Black pop culture history that
Mhm.
aren't very well known. And I feel like you know what I'm talking about specifically. Well, clearly, because you wrote it, but you
Yeah, yeah,
didn't.
no,
But
absolutely. No, I mean, we can talk about these things for sure. Like, I don't, I think I told you when I sent the press kit not to show the PDF because the PDF has stuff in there that I haven't revealed to the public yet,
no, no,
right?
no, no, no.
But
Everything you sent me is me. Like I don't know, because also I don't really talk to nobody like that anyway.
all right,
So yeah, so I'm like, nah. But um, want to talk? Well,
yeah,
I
but
want to talk about
we can
all.
talk
Okay,
about all that stuff. We can talk about all
okay.
that stuff, please. Yeah.
So the one thing that stood out to me was Ace Harlem
Yes.
from All Negro Comics,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple, I think maybe like a year or two ago.
See this? You see this here? So
Yes,
sure I'm shutting this out. There you go.
no, you sent me an image of that a couple years ago, and I'll be at work sometimes. Y'all be sending me stuff, and I can't react the way that I want to. So I gotta keep that shit like locked inside. I'm like, yo, I actually tried to buy like the original copy of All Negro Comics on
I did
eBay,
too.
and I was like, oh, nah, that's like,
It's like about $30,000 at the minimum, right?
nah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But the fact that you thought to include that, and
Mm-hmm.
especially with the history behind All Negro Comics being really the first Black comic book publisher ever,
Mm-hmm.
like 1947. What was it? Orville
Uh,
Gaines? Is
Gains,
it?
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes. Uh-huh.
yeah. There's so much history
Yeah.
with that. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you're just digging that out the crate and just giving that to people was just like, yo, that shit hit me in the spirit, man. It hit me like right
Yeah.
here.
No, I mean a big thing with me, like we've talked pretty extensively about how we used to engage with media, right? And
Yeah,
part of that, and we've also talked about myths, right?
yeah,
And a big part of that for me is that like I really do feel that a lot of times in popular culture, Black characters don't really get that second act, that follow-up adventure, right? And Ace Harlem is a character in all the Negro comics. He's kind of like a Dick Tracy type of character, admittedly.
yeah.
Um, and the story behind all Negro comics is that it was an anthology book. It was an all black creative team, and the plan was to drop the first issue, do a second issue, right? And the second issue never happened for any number of reasons. I've heard everything from paper printing to people storming the studio. Like I don't know, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because looking at that, I kind of said, all right, I want to make sure that I'm propping up black myths. Like I don't want to do it for every single comic, but if there's a way for me to kind of introduce these things again and give them a second act, and treat them as with the same reverence as a Captain America or a Spider-Man or a Batman, right?
Mhm.
And hopefully, you know, they can just go off into the wild to become something else, or continue on. Because I really thought that that was really unfortunate, and we were cheated out of that. And so the idea with the Ace Harlem thing is like we're basically following up with Ace Harlem in 2012. And the idea here is that like, what if all Negro comics just kept going?
Mhm.
Like, what if we got that second issue? What if we went all the way through the Silver Age? We went from the Frederick Wortham era to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age to the '90s to that Extreme era to the 2000s era. Whatever you want to call that. Um, And all the tropes of that particular era we play with and we represent, but we do it with these characters that really weren't given the mileage that they needed to really exist. And so it's part of the story. It's the feature comic in Afro Futures called All Negro Squad, which is a nod to All Negro Comics, but also to DC's All Star Squadron, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And what we're doing is we're putting Ace Harlem, who is this character's Golden Age comic book character, and we're putting him on the same superhero team, quote unquote, as John Henry, right? And this is John Henry from the Ballad of John Henry, because again, we're talking about myths. John Henry's a folklore character, and so we're playing with this idea with him of maybe if we believe in him enough, then he can just exist, right? Like he doesn't have to die at the end of that story. Maybe he can also keep going. And there's a larger concept behind that hopefully we can tap into later down the line. Another character from that All Negro Comics is Lion Man.
Yep. Hmm.
And what we've done is we've introduced Lion Man's daughter into the mix. And so she's also part of the story named Savannah. Then, of course, we have Kizzy Harlem, which is Ace's granddaughter, and she's also part of that mix. And then we gave Ace a ward by the name of Streetwise Hercules, and we're really building this super team that is. Some people compare. I've talked to a few people at this point. They've like, oh, it's kind of like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Yeah, it's kind of like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, I can see
Right?
that. Yeah.
It's a little bit like the Authority. Um, uh, but yeah, that's the larger concept behind it, is we want to create these characters. We allow these characters to breathe again. So
Yeah, man, I'm super duper excited, man, and like I'm glad you're mentioning the myth part of it because, yeah, black people like black heroism, it doesn't get to be mythic, it barely gets to be paramilitary, like
yeah,
for real, you know
right,
what I'm
right,
saying?
right, yeah, right.
Like, and this is an opportunity to kind of challenge that and create a brand new narrative that
Hmm.
opens up, the floodgates for other things to happen.
Hmm.
That's why I'm be honest, like when I was looking through like the stills, I was like, yo, I'm getting kind of choked up because I'm just like, first of all, I know you personally,
Hmm.
and that's just a level of pride that's like, yo, my guy is doing big shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes. And then it just happens to be this thing that, as someone being a comic book head, a black comic book head at that, and definitely feeling underrepresented in that space, it
Hmm.
means so much that you're
Yeah,
creating this type of you're really creating a space, a community, I guess,
yeah.
where the possibilities are endless. And
Hmm.
I kind of want to circle back to something because we kind of got to wrap up in a little bit, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I want to do more of these with you. But
Yeah, yeah. We can
um,
talk about this in another time. Yeah.
when you were talking about black kids and literacy, black and brown kids and literacy,
Hmm.
and how you read the style section and asking your mother to like buy you books and things like that.
Hmm.
That wasn't my childhood, actually. Like my parents didn't really, especially my mother, because I grew up with a single mom. She
Hmm.
didn't encourage like intellectual things. Like my mother wanted me to be into sports. My
Hmm.
mother didn't even want me to be into martial arts. Like, I had to sneak and do that shit. You
Oh,
know what I'm saying?
interesting.
Like,
Wow.
yeah,
Hmm.
like I didn't grow up with like that type of background where you had like a mother who was like, yeah, go ahead read these books. Like my mother would look at me weird for reading books, actually,
Oh,
especially when I
interesting.
got older. Yeah.
Interesting.
My mother would say shit like, yo, don't be reading. Like, I have books in here on like super string theory and the
Hmm.
human genome. And I remember buying those books 20, 30, whatever years ago. And my mom would see those books like, what are you reading this for? Like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I feel like a lot of black kids actually deal with that.
Yeah.
Like that come from like, wherever, you know what I'm saying? Like grew up in the hood or whatever. Because like little black boys especially, they deal with like the adultification of their existence, but not the adultification in the sense that you're pushing them to be
Yeah.
intellectual. You're
Yeah.
pushing them to do like chores or just do other shit, be hypersexual, hyper aggressive,
Yeah.
not in
Yeah.
touch with like their emotions and
Hmm.
things like that. And
Hmm.
one of the things that literature does, at least what I realized, it really puts your emotions into perspective, because
Hmm.
when you're reading characters, you
Yes.
connect with a lot of different emotions.
Yeah. Well,
And
okay. If I can just real quick,
no, go ahead, yeah,
I firmly believe that characters are psychology.
yeah.
And like when you really, the best characters are examining the psychology of a certain personality type. And that was just what I was gonna say. Yeah.
In fact, I'm glad that you mentioned that because the X-Men video I did a video on X-Men the animated series.
Mhm.
When you watch that, or if you watch that,
Mhm.
you'll see that I go in depth about what you're talking about
Okay. Yeah.
with those characters, and once again, character is the connective tissue because it connects us through emotional content.
Mhm.
And with like Black boys and literacy, one of the main issues that I have is that when those Black boys come of age and
Mhm.
they don't have literacy skills, or they don't have like that intellectual foundation, it
Mhm.
becomes far more difficult for them to exist in a job space. You know what I'm
Oh
saying?
yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
'cause, you know what
Absolutely.
I mean? Because yeah, if you're reading on like a seventh grade reading level, because you was out in the street, so you was playing like whatever video games all fucking day. Ain't nothing wrong with video games. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
do that, you do that all day, and you don't supplement it with other things, then you become that monolith that they try to put Black people in.
Let people in. Right. Yep.
And I think Black boys more than anything deal with being monolithic. You're either the athlete or you the street motherfucker. You motherfucker in the streets.
Mhm.
And neither of those things are conducive to like being a
Long term.
yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Because like
Mhm.
surprisingly, they're very physical things. And I guess the point I'm making, because I'm very long-winded, in case you haven't
Yeah. That's
noticed,
fine. You're good.
um, is that the adultification of Black boys is rooted in physicality and not
Mhm.
intellect and
No.
emotional
Yeah.
content.
Absolutely. And guess
And
where that comes from?
yeah, you know what I'm saying? And thinking
Mhm.
back to my mom, I'm like, why the fuck wouldn't you want your son to read? Why wouldn't you want your son to be more intellectual? Like, I ain't putting my business out there, but I didn't do good in school. I was a fuck up. I cut class. I threw shit at teachers. I got straight Fs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know
All
what I'm
right.
saying? Like I'm a
Mhm.
GED baby. I had to get a GED. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Because nobody was supervising me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was hooked in school and doing whatever the fuck I wanted to do.
Right.
I wasn't no street mom. I wasn't selling drugs and nothing like that, but I still wasn't on the path. You know what I'm saying? And
Right. Yeah.
given the way that I am now, I look back and like, damn, my mom, she had like a little brainiac and she ain't even noticed that shit.
Yeah.
She, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? She could have put me in programs. She could have put me in all types of whatever. You know what I'm saying? I ain't looking on some regretful shit, but when you said that,
Right.
it sparked the thought because I empathize with Black boys that deal with that.
Oh yeah.
And
Mhm.
I feel that comic books is actually what got me into literature
Yeah.
because
I agree.
yeah, like I didn't, you know what I'm saying? Like comic books, it's still a form of literature, and
Yeah.
reading comic books has ideas in it that make you want to seek out other shit. I
Mhm.
started wanting to read about physics because of the Flash. Like the Speed Force caused me to want to learn about the four forces:
Yeah.
electromagnetic,
Yep.
gravitational, weak, and
Yep.
strong. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? Like
Right.
the X-Men, it kind of spurred. I was already kind of like mildly militant. I just kept that shit under wraps, but the X-Men kind of had me like, yo, motherfucking Magneto, man, you on that?
Yeah, Magneto is right.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, and the
Right.
sad reality now is I don't see a lot of kids getting that from comics. I don't see kids watching Avengers and saying like, "Oh, damn, they stand for something." You know what I'm saying? Like, and to go back to the whole hero like mythic versus
Or or
military thing,
or
or
if it
rather
or if they do, it's like a very simplistic version of that. Like they stand for good, and those
well,
people are bad, you know. And yeah.
not even that, right? So to take it back to the white male power fantasy, and the main reason why I'm so caught up on that concept is because the connective tissue that nerds have with superheroes is the power fantasy, but the emphasis is on power, and power
Yes.
doesn't require altruism.
No.
Power. That's why you have sympathetic villains. Villains
Mhm.
are a power fantasy for people. The Joker is a lot of people's power fantasy, but
Yeah.
the Joker isn't altruistic, and
No.
that's why you have movies for Joker and Venom and shit like
Oh
that.
yeah.
When in
Right.
reality, it's like these the villains. These ain't the
These the
motherfuckers you're
villains.
supposed to root
Right.
for.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
because people are so caught up in the power fantasy. You know what I'm saying? Power doesn't require any ideology behind it because the power is the ideology. And
Right.
that's the danger of misinterpreting what superheroes represent.
Yep. Yep.
Superheroes are avatars for justice. They are social justice warriors. They
Yeah.
are
Oh yeah.
literally that.
They
You know what I'm
literally
saying?
that. Yeah.
But when you miss that because you focus on he can punch through a bus and
Right.
don't realize that like, yeah, Goku, he could destroy a planet, but he doesn't because he's good. They don't see that shit. They just
Hmm.
see yo, I want to destroy some shit. That's why motherfuckers like Deadpool is popular
Yeah.
because Deadpool wreck shit.
He's wreck
Deadpool
shit.
don't.
He
Deadpool ain't.
says he says fuck shit piss.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And like
Right.
the changing the changing nature of what a power fantasy represents,
Mhm,
it's kind of leading to like the corrosion, kind of sort
mhm.
of the culture, and I think that's another component to explore as well. But I'm gonna shut up right here because,
I
like I
got
said,
you. I
I'm
got you.
long-winded.
No,
But
like maybe there's room there for us to have a conversation about power fantasies in the near future because I think the reason I bristled at you using that term white male power fantasies is because I had seen that term used so much in the previous decade, right?
yeah,
And it was always used as the opening paragraph for any article about superheroes. Like, you know what I
yeah,
mean? He's like, superheroes are a power fantasy after all, and this is why, again, this is why they're important that women read them, and this is why it's important that black people read them. This is why important is Latino. It's like there was a lot of that over and over again, and that I think that was my knee jerk reaction to what you were saying.
no,
You know?
I wasn't disagreeing with you.
No,
In
I
fact,
know, right? Yeah.
yeah, I was giving you examples of how they are power fantasies, but you're not wrong in stating that they're simplistic. Because honestly, that's literally what I was just saying. The
Hmm.
simplicity is that they focus only on the power.
Only on power, right?
That's
Yeah.
what makes the
Hmm.
shit simplistic. But when
Hmm.
you add the nuance of ideology to it, then
Right.
it becomes something far more complex.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
then that's when, both of our perspectives kind of get funneled
Merge.
into one, and then it
Yeah.
becomes full circle, you know what I'm saying? Into
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
'Cause and I think that's the beauty of having like, friendly, brotherly, conversations and debates and things like that, as opposed to like, man, I'm the man and you are not the. That shit,
Right. Yeah.
it doesn't push anything forward. When
No.
you're able
No.
to
No.
have a philosophical debate about something with two people with potent philosophical perspectives, it pushes philosophy forward
Hmm.
instead of pulling it back. And that's why I
Yep.
appreciate you, because I feel like I could always talk to you about some real shit, and it's never like, yo, what the fuck is Troy talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's
Hmm.
always like, yo, he on code. You know what I'm saying? And that's important. You know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
that's what we need. We don't need Eric July. Like, no disrespect to him,
No.
like at all. If he watches this, he probably won't. But
Right.
we need more of what you're doing. We need your movement. And actually, I'll even say this: Eric July's brand existing is perfectly fine. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist, because
Mhm.
then that's an imbalance.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
things, you have to have your yin and your yang. You have to have that balance in order for a thing to function properly. But I think the reason things are not functioning properly is because there's a massive imbalance
Oh
where the
yes.
pendulum
Absolutely.
is swinging in one direction and
Hmm.
not like, kind of straddling the midpoint.
Straddling middle. Yeah. There's no one holding. There's not enough people holding the line anymore. Because we've radicalized everything. So yeah.
And we being radical. I don't think it's a bad thing. I
No, it's not
think
a bad thing. No, no.
it
It depends on what it is.
exactly. I think
Yeah.
they've radicalized right wing talking points and then funneled it into pop culture conversations, because nerd culture has become increasingly right wing. It really
Yeah.
has.
And that it's another. I think that pendulum does swing both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not even just nerd culture has become increasingly. I understand when you say right wing, right? I understand that, like, we're not talking about necessarily Republican, right?
Mm-mm.
We're just talking about a certain type of conservative viewpoint that is devoid of nuance,
Yeah.
right?
I understand.
Um, and I think I just wanted to clarify that's what that at least that's what I was taking from it.
No,
Um,
that's accurate. Yeah.
and that can also exist in a liberal space.
Definitely.
And I think that that's the key thing here. Like, I've heard frequent conversations about, or at least in the spaces I inhabit, that like that line has been blurred, and that is happening politically, right? It's happening socially, and it's also happening and because of those two things, it's happening on the entertainment space as well, right? And
Yeah.
how we engage with it. So yeah, I totally feel you on that. I feel you on that 100%.
Yeah, and make no mistake, I'm not right wing or left wing. Actually, I'm anti. I'm more revolutionary than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, I'm more like Mamiya type motherfucker. But
Mm-hmm.
if I had to compare myself to anything,
Yeah.
but I recognize that. But I think a part of why I recognize that in the way that I do, it comes from being a black person on the internet who makes content
Yeah.
that is very socially conscious. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Like, because when you were talking about like the bad like comic book YouTubers and stuff, I don't think I'm that.
No.
I feel like I do my thing. You know what I'm saying? I get busy with it. You know what I'm saying? Because I spend so much time with it. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
trying to make sure that the information is thoroughly researched, but it's also coming from a far more nuanced and socially conscious point of view that you don't really get from a lot of other um, channels, I guess, or
No.
whatever.
No, yeah. Yeah.
But
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
the reason I'm mentioning that is because my biggest opposition, it's the right wing nerds that I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. They come for you. I've seen that. Yeah. Hmm.
In droves, the motherfuckers be
Yeah.
on.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's also that's the other part of it too. It's like they come for you in droves because they've been mobilized. There's always a smoking gun, man. Like especially in these internet spaces, someone. I'm not trying to be too conspiratorial, but someone pushed them in your direction. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so, that's the other part of it, which is like, there's a point where they become where you're dealing with lemmings.
yeah, and for me personally, I don't take it personal because they
Mhm,
don't know what they're talking about. Like
mhm.
conversations like this are far more fulfilling because I feel like we're
Oh
getting
yeah,
something from each other. We're
yeah,
growing as we're talking, as we're discussing.
right, yeah, yeah,
If I
yeah,
engage with every troll, you can't
yeah.
change a troll's mind because like the troll got a fucking brain of a raisin. So you know what I'm saying? You can't turn a raisin back to a grape. So like,
Right,
you
yeah,
know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So they
yeah,
just
all
gonna
right,
be at the frequency they on, but the
right,
mission still
yeah,
stands as it is. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not gonna switch up. I'm not gonna quit doing this because like once again, the mission is to be in a space and within a community of black creators who are pushing the culture forward and not
yeah,
pulling it back.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I feel like that's why we connect. You know what I mean? Because
Oh yeah,
we
yeah,
got a similar mission. We just do different versions of it.
oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
I think like what you're doing is incredibly important, and I'm just
Thanks.
so grateful to know you and to be a part. You know what I'm saying in this capacity
Mhm.
of what you're doing, man. And like anything I could do to support you, man. But best believe I do that shit. You know what I'm saying?
I
Like
appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, like I mean, like the Kickstarter went very well.
yeah,
We're definitely past our goal on Afro Futures. That at the same time, like I really want more people to see this because like currently we have 103 backers. It would be great to get way more backers on this, you know. So sorry, of course not my Afro Futures is calling. Look at that.
yeah.
And yeah, like we got 16 days to go. It's great that we're fully funded. It like it can definitely justify sending out 103 copies of this thing. Well, actually more than 103 because some people got bundles. Um, but at the same time, uh, yeah, like I want this. Oh, look, we're both dropping stuff. At the same time, like, yeah, I want more people to experience this, and I want it to be in more people's hands. So I appreciate the opportunity for you to let me talk my shit, you know, but
Always.
also, for to get in front of what I think your audience. I feel like your audience would definitely appreciate this, you know,
Yeah, definitely.
at least the
I mean,
intention of what I'm trying to do here. So
no, we gotta once again a part of building a community like this is working within the community because what we're doing is a very grassroots thing. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah,
it's very grassroots. It's very from the people for the people. You know what I'm saying?
yes,
Dedicated to the people, and
yes,
that's the most important part. So like, I actually I wish that I had a larger fan base, but I feel like eh, maybe next 2 years, OmniFrame will grow, and as I grow, it'll give me an opportunity to like we all gonna grow together. That's how I
hmm
look at the shit. You know
hmm
what I'm saying?
hmm
Like
there you go. That's the
yeah,
hope, man. That's the hope, man. Like the whole thing with this Afro Futures thing is like I wanted to make stuff with my friends.
yeah.
you know, that was also the guiding light in this. So I'm actually really interested in to see if this thing can expand. Because that's the other part of this. If more people back this thing, then it justifies doing a second issue. You know. So I'm all in, man. I'm all in.
I'm all in with it too. I was actually trying to donate to the Kickstarter like right now. I'm gonna do that when we get off Yeah, I had to pay some bills, man. So bills got
It's
fucked
okay,
up.
man. I understand. Look, everybody, it's there for a month for a reason. So like, it finds you when you're ready.
Yeah, but like this was an honor, man. Like this is
Thanks, man.
probably one of the best conversations I've had all year, actually, to be honest. Because once
Thanks.
again, most conversations is like people sending me DMs and shit I don't give a fuck about, or people
Yeah.
like, oh hey, look at what you did with them nunchucks. My little kid brother could whoop your ass or some shit like
Oh,
that.
really? People doing that too? Damn.
Yeah, man. Or
Uh,
like, just other dumb shit. So nah, like this is great because I don't get to talk to people that are like you are a comic book aficionado and like just your knowledge of comics. But the fact that you was just like, yeah, no, it was actually Fabian Zazie. I'm like, yeah, that's some shit I need in my life.
There you go. No, I feel that, man. I really feel that. I like my time at the comic shop. I won't make this long, but my time at the comic shop, like I was fortunate enough to encounter like a lot of different people who had very interesting viewpoints. And I also feel that was an extension of my education outside of college, right? Um, and it really did become a space for conversation, you know? And, especially after the pandemic now, it's like you get less and less of that. So,
Yeah,
I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to do this for sure.
yeah, man. Like I said, I don't get to talk comics. I don't really get to talk comics with anybody because most of my friends are not into comics. Like
Mm,
I grew up
mm,
around like dudes that either played Yu-Gi-Oh or they was in the streets. Like
mm.
so,
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like that midpoint. I don't know what. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So like talking to you was like always just the dopest shit ever, man. But
Thanks, man.
yeah, we gotta do this again soon, very soon.
Cool. Cool.
So
Cool.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But
Um, how should we close out?
well, the way that I think we should close out is tell people where they can find you and everything that you're working on, everything you've done.
Mhm.
Just this is your chance to promote Troy Jeffrey Allen.
Okay. Yeah, you can find me on. I said I don't do TikTok, so it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and every couple of months I regret being on Twitter, but you can find me at TJA Comics. And that's pretty much everywhere. Most importantly, probably more importantly than following me is like, yeah, go type in Afro Futures, AFROFUTURES on Kickstarter, and you'll see like some of the stories I'm working on. It's 9 stories, 20 plus creators, and we didn't even talk about the hip hop component that much, but one DJ. That's the other part of this is like it's hosted by a DJ, 9 stories, and you had it right, man. It's like for lack of a better description, it is heavy metal for a hip hop generation. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, and um, that's it. That's all we
That's it. That's
got.
it.